Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions. Your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Kyle. Hi, Bryan. I'd like you to check out the track Meet The Sloth from the Australian band Toehider. It's an interesting band name, but I also really like the correlation between the album title, What Kind of Creature Am I?, and the track title, Meet The Sloth. Also interesting, the time is 12 minutes and 34 seconds of a song. Let's dive into this and see what Toehider is bringing to the table today. Got a nice 3 going on here.
Painted gold and looking old, the ornament sat on the counter. Fingers cold and singing soul, the woman was biting her nails. Granny said it'll keep them fed, the mysterious family heirloom. But he shook his head, said maybe 10, the man at the second-hand store. She stormed outside, scratching her skin, cursing her nan on her dad's side. Pictured her wrinkly
A folky 4 right here.
a little kid, let's call him Sid, woke up the next morning for breakfast, pulled up the lid of the kitchen bin, and saw what his mother threw out. He pulled it out and wiped it down. Did it ever finish his cereal? That little mouth just popped right out, and Alberta tied up old scroll, a picture of a moss-covered cave. Sid just made out the inscription, to them that are seeking the gold must be prepared to meet the sloth at midnight.
Oh! Very fun guitar work, but those harmonies. I know we're barely 10% in, but I'm getting a lot of Genesis vibes from this.
He bellowed out, I'm going out, and put on his big yellow jacket. Without a doubt, I'll save the house. He followed the map on his bike, and look at him just pedaling ferociously head for the mountain. With bleeding shin
There's so much anticipation being built in these verses.
They'd have nowhere else they could live, and Ma wasn't great with finances. The man from the council would give them only 1 or 2 more months. But he met a swamp and he had to stop. He's back with no way to get over.
Very infectious rhythmic flow with the vocal melodies too. Texture layering with the guitar.
Consulting the map one more time, smoothing his hand on the wrinkles. He scratched off the dirt and the grime. There underneath said, meet the sloth and wait right there by the swamp. Wait for the sloth to journey down from the top. Let him guide you, follow him. Trust in his permanent
So we have this push and pull too, and they're using it as transitions to have the energy of one section introduce the next, go back, introduce the next, and have that become the new norm. Fun little polyrhythm there. The polyrhythm, the lighter. We're gonna stick with this. Now we have our new section. Yeah, okay, so they did that 3 times in a row. That's a fun way to create smoothness between ideas. Instead of trying to fluidly blend them, you just present them back and forth.
On the rock, patiently waiting for the three-toed one to
Beautiful, calming, serene.
and watched out there for hours, half expecting him to crawl out from the black, disgusting cave. When there he hung, and slowly down he climbed from the cecropia tree that hung overhead, so gently soothed. The giant calmed and smiled.
Swelling of
He
strings?
greeted Sid and
Or is that synth?
him some leaves. The kid politely tried to eat. With outstretched arms, he motioned the direction the two of them should head. Sid followed.
Ooh, a little bit of a key change there.
The spirits of the forest keep track of every life.
All right, so we have an 11 here, alternating 5 and 6. 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh. Well, we had an 11, then we had a 12 plus an extension in order to transition us into this new moment. Oh, and the 12 makes sense because this is in 3. So setting up the new time signature, brilliant. This is very fun texture layering. There's a general de-emphasis of any bassy tones though. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I think it generally works. Ooh. Bit of darkness. It's an interesting bit of longing in here, particularly this third chord here. Almost feels nostalgic. A little bit of discontent. lot of suspense.
Blissfully inhaled the breeze and opened up to his surroundings. Took one more mouthful loudly, said he just carried on. Said to his own and all but gone, it no longer seemed to matter. But it'd been so long, his mother's gone, surely she died by now. Not alone, he felt at home at one with the forest and creatures. A slightly smiled, always smiled, went down in the fur and passed. Moths flew and fell from his fur. Now a meal for a family of humans. And Sid would not dare interfere with the fate of his friend. Meet the Sloth behind that, keep heading back.
Dude, this chorus just sounds so good.
Meet the Sloth alone and keep going forward. Follow Bryan with find your way. Gold still sits there to this day. In that close moss covered
And for that big majestic ending, this is bittersweet. Yeah, dude, that ends on a somber note. It's a fun track though. Got some proggy folk going on there. The ending surprised me. Those distorted guitars came back in much heavier than I remember from the beginning of the track, which I think we just had electric guitar. I don't think they were super distorted, which I think is why they felt larger. But also, we spent a lot of time with acoustic guitars in that middle section, and that's a big contrast. So that's definitely going to make them feel larger. I like the general journey of this, though. There's something a bit whimsical, maybe even at the beginning. There's a nice calming start with a touch of fun mystery. There's these big bombastic choruses, though. I don't know how that works into the general feeling of the emotion there, but they sound great. And they definitely need some contrast there because the verses are long. A lot of words crammed into these verses, and the words sound great. I really like the rhythmic flow of the vocals on the verses, but they do. I kind of dread getting into the lyrics on this because I feel like there's going to be so many of them. So much of them? Probably so much of them. But as we get out of that second chorus, we have these series of winding down transitions. And then that takes us into a very folky midsection that just feels fun. There's a joyful, almost childlike naivety to the middle of this track that just feels like pure joy. I find it really interesting then when we kind of switched gears and took the acoustic guitar work into a Baroque area, bringing in a little bit of tension through classical guitar work. This took us back to the first time we had lyrics, because a lot of this area, this folk section, is just vocalizations singing along with the guitars. But when we bring the words back in, we bring the electric guitars back in too, and there's something else here. A little bit of a darkness that the song has kind of teased but hasn't necessarily leaned into yet. We begin to explore it a little bit, and then there's a key change, and we have this big bombastic finale. I mean, it isn't just like a weird emotional switch. We build into it. But we kind of end the song on this major moment. I don't know if I would necessarily call it triumph, but it certainly feels like the end of a long thing. And interweaved in there, that darkness kind of becomes apprehension, nostalgia. There is a longing for something and a reluctance to do something mixed in there. But it does end on this really big note. The vocals are belting, the drums are hitting all their cymbals, the guitars have these massive, incredibly stable chords. And then that fades. We have a somber outro. Now, once again, though, it's mixed, and I think that's something we see a lot of on this track, except for the middle folky bridge section, which is primarily more on this naive joyfulness. But a plethora of this track is based around emotional complexity, and we get that at the end here too. The final moments are somber, definitely lower energy, and harmonically a bit sad. There's a positivity to it, but it's bittersweet. I don't know what all of this is supposed to represent, but I think going off of incredibly generic ideas here, this feels like an adventure. We have definitely gone a lot of places here, and by the end, I think that big triumphant moment, that really big bombastic finale, is the end of the journey, whatever that is. The nostalgia, the longing, the reluctance leading up to it is realizing you're coming to the end of this. Do you really want this journey to be over? You decide to end it, and then you're left alone. Your adventure's behind you now. That's the final minute of the song, the acoustic guitar solo. That's generally what I get out of this. It's a light little fun, almost like a childhood adventure novel, something along the lines of, say, like a Narnia kind of idea. I really dig it from that perspective, and I do feel like I've been on a journey alongside this song. I mentioned that there is sort of a lack of a bass presence in here, and the further we got into the track, the more I started to realize I don't think there's a bass guitar or a bass instrument at all. We have the bass kick. That is probably the most prominent sound in here in the lower end range. We also have a warm resonance of the acoustic guitars on that lowest string. That gives the coloring of the track a little bit of a darkness, a little bit of that warmth of that low end sound. And I think that's it. Through the entire folky bridge, there is no bass guitar. We do have electric guitar, clean, I think. We have 2 acoustic guitars. There's no bass for like a solid 5 minutes at least. And when the electric guitar came in at the end with the distortion, we get to this big rock ending. I really tried to find a bass guitar in here too, and I didn't hear one. Now, admittedly, mentioned this in the past, my ears are kind of shot for low-end sounds. Anyways, I kind of need the bass a little bit boosted for me to really hear what's going on with it. Maybe it's there, but it's just really quiet. Maybe it's even tucked under the bass kick, only ever playing when the bass kick does. That's a possibility. But based on what I hear, there's no bass guitar in here, which I find to be really interesting. A majority of this track I would classify under a folky type of prog. A proggy type of folk. Maybe a folk rock. We do have some electric guitars, but so much of this track is based around the acoustic guitar. And I wonder if they really took that to the next level and said, well, we just don't need a bass at all. We have the guitar, that provides us chords. The low string is low enough. Maybe that's all they needed. And like I mentioned in the middle of the track, I don't know how I feel about this. I generally love bass. I have a bass. I have played bass in a band. I like writing bass parts. I like writing interesting bass parts. I like hearing interesting bass parts. So part of me is a little upset that there's no bass guitar in here. But when I listen to the song itself, does it need one? And I don't think so. The folk sections sound right. You know, just having a single lute, or in this case, an acoustic guitar, is all the genre really needs. It sounds right without the bass guitar. And when we get to the larger, very rocky ending to this, it sounds fine too. The bass kick is doing enough of a job, and some of the lower end resonance of our guitar chords, they're filling in the low end enough. It doesn't feel empty without it. It's definitely a personal thing that I kind of wish there was more bass in here, or more important bass lines in here, but I don't think that the song necessarily needs it. I think it's done well without it. But I do think it's something worth bringing up because there are very few tracks that we listen to on this channel that doesn't have some sort of bass instrument. Even when we veer outside of the rock and metal realm, there's a bassy synth in electronic or pop electronic music. Even hip hop tends to have a lower end instrument in the hip hop that we've listened to. It's very rare to listen to a track without a bass instrument. So that's kind of neat and something unique that Toehider is bringing to this. The vocals are incredible. Even just looking at the verses, which have more of a rhythmic flow to them than anything else, they're not spoken word, they're not rapped, they're certainly sung, but it's clean singing with a heavy emphasis on rhythmic elements, and particularly a speed through the syllables. There really aren't a lot of long held out notes in the verse, which works fantastic in contrast to the long held out harmonies of the chorus. That makes them feel really important since we're actually focusing on a slower delivery of words. But when you listen to the single vocals in the verse, and you listen to the speed that they're being delivered at, it's really interesting to hear just how precise each and every pitch is. Each syllable feels perfect, perfectly in tune. I think that's an incredible feat for the speed. To not only just be able to hit these pitches as perfectly as the vocalist does, but at the speed that they do, constantly jumping between all of these pitches and not missing. I'd say that it was pitch corrected heavily, but there's no artifacting that I could pick up that this would be heavily pitch corrected. This came out in... When did this come out? 2014. So I'd wager there's probably some light pitch correction going on, as is just an incredibly common element in your FX chain for a vocalist. But it's such a small amount that I think it puts a lot of weight on the performer to really hit these notes at this speed. But then we come to the chorus, dude, and these harmonies are phenomenal. It just sounds larger than life, and it's done primarily through vocal stacks. There is some production stuff going on in here for sure. There's some reverb that's really building out the size, but it feels massive. It is such a cool thing to hear coming off of the verse. The contrast between these two is so large. And the fun thing is, there's not really too much of a change in like the instrumental sounds. You know, it's not as big as the folky bridge, which was two acoustic guitars moving into the massive distorted guitar of the finale. Like, that's a sonic shift. This is just vocals and acoustic guitar and a little bit of light, clean electric guitar. It's the same instrumentation, but it feels so much different. Part of that is going to be the harmonic qualities too, moving away from whatever our chords were in the verse into these new chords that really presents the sort of import to this moment. But I mean, that vocal stack sells this too. It's such an electrifying component of the chorus here. Coming back to the bridge, vocals, again, I think that listening to the vocalist sing alongside the guitars, both at the beginning of this bridge and towards the end, you can really begin to hear just how perfectly in tune the vocalist voice is and how good they are at matching pitch. It is just, it's immaculate. It's so good, dude. I could drone on about this for hours. It is just the crispest intonation, which usually I use crisp for production, but here it's just, he's so in tune. It's wild. I love it. And I think the harmonies are as powerful as they are as well, because there's almost that perfection level to the intonation of all the pitches. It's a little different from the more raw harmonies that we would hear in Genesis, to draw this parallel again, because I really do feel like this feels like modern day Genesis. But Genesis never really used too much any pitch correction. If I remember, yeah, they wouldn't have had pitch correction in the 60s and 70s. So there's more, it's more of a raw harmony where there's going to be minor elements of intonation going on in there. Someone's going to be just a little bit flat or a little bit sharp, and it's going to bring a little bit of that raw tension and fluctuation to it, whereas this almost feels robotic. And I can totally see the comments already that this doesn't sound as good as when other bands, bands of the past have done it without any sort of production tricks. It's two very different sounds. I don't think one is any better than the other, but it definitely requires training your ear to enjoy it. Just like every genre of music, every sound requires that. Everything, all of music is an acquired taste. I think if you don't find this enjoyable, that is a perfectly fine opinion to have. But also it might be worth listening to more produced vocals and developing an ear for enjoying that. If nothing else, maybe after a few hours of, or few's kind of small, but you listen to a variety of music. If you don't like it, well, you gave it a shot at least. But maybe you end up enjoying it. I definitely enjoy both sides. I love raw vocals. I also love produced vocals. So more the merrier for me. But here, this utter, almost robotic precision is just so, dude, it's so good. It's tasty. Love it. Anything else I want to add to this? Drum work and guitar work, really well done. There's not a lot of spectacle to this. We do have some moments where we get to hear the guitar play a little faster, we get to hear some nice drum parts, but for the most part, it's sort of just locking in. It's more about doing what the song needs than trying to show off yourself. And I think that the guitars are consistently finding new ways to both kind of blend into the background without just strumming chords forever. This is not 12 minutes of chord strumming, and I think that's one of the cool things about it. When I listen to the guitars, there's always something interesting going on. Not enough to steal the spotlight, but enough to keep the song moving forward and feeling fresh. And speaking about that, I mean, we probably should touch on this real quick too, is the idea of the transitions in here. We do have some nice, smooth transitions, finding ways to mold and develop one sound into another. One case, we used a fade in here. Pretty straightforward, but incredibly effective. But they also used this, I gotta make a term for this, or see if anyone's come up with a term for it. I think it works really well in here, where we've been playing this sound, then we'll play a new sound, come back to the sounds, play that new sound again, and then this is our new idea. We get to stay in this. It's almost like a transition. We're kind of flipping back and forth between them, but eventually we're gonna land on what we introduced new to the table rather than return back to where we were. It's not a smooth molding modification, but it does work at transferring the idea over. I'm trying to think of a cool like visual analogy, something that Phil might do, and I don't know. It's kind of like my brain is like, man, dude, it's kind of like a J transition. I don't know about that in particular, but I'm starting to see a parallel there. Introducing one concept before you fully moved on. It's not a perfect parallel, but I can kind of see it. I don't think I have much else to add to this, though. The journey we talked about, emotions, instrumentation was great. The vocals were fantastic. I think that touches on most of it. Let me hit some lyrics. Maybe something else will come to mind that I want to touch on before we wrap up the video. But if not, we'll see what this story is about, and we'll end this. What is this story? There is a surface level read to this. It feels like a children's book with the general rhyme and cadence that's incredibly consistent throughout the entire track. The first verse, and just to kind of get a feel for how this goes, I'll read a few lines. Painted gold and looking old, the ornament sat on the counter. Fingers cold and sinking soul, the woman was biting her nails. Granny said it'd keep them fed, this mysterious family heirloom, but he shook his head, said maybe 10, the man at the second-hand store. There is a rhyme and cadence to everything that feels very nursery rhyme-ish. The first verse, though, as kind of showcased here, is that this woman has an ornament. She takes it to a pawn shop, and she remembers her granny saying that this family heirloom will keep the family fed. But the guy at the pawn shop says 10 bucks. That's all I'll give you for it. So she heads outside and starts cursing her granny. It's just like, this was supposed to save us and it's not doing anything. She just throws it in the bin when she gets home. Her kid, though, the next morning says, let's call him Sid, probably because that rhymes with kid and it keeps the rhyme going on. Says he woke up the next morning, pulled up the lid on the kitchen bin and saw this gold thing. He pulls it out and something falls out of it. It's a picture of a moss-covered cave and an inscription. To them that are seeking the gold, they must be prepared to. This is where the chorus comes in. It says, meet the sloth at midnight here by the rocks. Meet the sloth at 12 o'clock on the dot. But if he's late, don't blame him. He'll be busy measuring the very approximate distance. So now we have a quest at hand. The boy, Sid, as the second verse details, he says he's going out and he heads into the woods, into the mountains, and he's following this map on his bike. And it talks about how in not too long, probably 1 or 2 months, him and his mom are going to be out on the streets. They don't have much in the way of finances, and there's nowhere else for them to live. They don't have family, so he's got to do this. He's got to save his family. He winds up at a swamp. There's no way to cross it. He's starting to get very chilly, though. His lips are turning blue. Then he turns over the scroll that he had. And it says, "Meet the sloth and wait there by the swamp. Wait for sloth to journey down from the top. Let him guide you, follow him, trust in his permanent grin." The bridge then shows Sid waiting on the rocks, and the sloth descends down from the treetops, slowly climbing down. And with a giant calming smile, he greets Sid and hands him some leaves, which the kid politely tried to eat. The sloth then motions that they should head upward. And this is the entire bridge here. It starts out with the humming and then transitions into the vocalist singing without words alongside the guitars. By the time we bring back the verse, bring the electric guitar back in at the end of the track, it says time would go and Wrinkle showed the journey. It just took forever, 20 years, 30 years, who knew exactly how long? It basically says that Sid has been following this sloth for decades. Now, one thing I left out, and it's going to be really important coming up, is that when Sid found the swamp, he saw the moss-covered cave just on the other side of the swamp. He couldn't make it over there himself, but he's been following this sloth for 20, maybe 30 years. I find this really interesting. For a reason you'll find in a moment. It talks about how the sloth is now too old. It says Sid is now also too old, and all of the gold, well, no longer seem to matter. It's been so long, and his mother is probably gone. Surely she's died by now. And not alone, though. He felt at home, at one with the forest and the creatures. The sloth, he smiled as he always smiled, laid down in the flora and passed. The moths flew and fell from his fur, now a meal for a family of pumas, and Sid would not dare interfere with the fate of his friends. So it's been long enough that Sid doesn't even care about the gold anymore. The house was probably lost years ago. His mom might not even be alive. And now the person he has spent most of his life with, this sloth, also passes in front of him. The final chorus then says, "Leave the sloth behind and keep heading north. Leave the sloth alone and keep going forth. Followed blind, but found your way. The gold still sits there to this day in that gross moss-covered cave." Presumably, all he had to do was cross the swamp to get to the gold. But instead, for decades, follows this animal through this path north. And by the time he realizes he's never getting this gold, he's fine with that. It's such a strange little tale. I don't know. I certainly understand the bittersweet feeling at the end of this track, though. I think that makes sense. The somber finale, like the true last minute of this track, makes sense. I mentioned I felt like I had gone on a journey when the song was over. Yeah, dude, the song is about going on a journey. I do think it's interesting that where other bands that we've checked out, I can't remember the one either. The song was about a girl who followed a rabbit into the woods and found an entire fairyland, and they went to like this mountain where these little rock people were, and then they fought this bad guy, and then they got on a zeppelin that took them back home. I don't remember, but like the song tells the journey, and we've listened to quite a few, especially in the prog folk area, songs that tell the journey. And I think that's something really interesting here, is that the song details leading up to the journey. It details the tail end of it, speaking about 30 years in the future, and the sloth dies and he thinks back on his past. But the journey, those 20 or 30 years, are detailed in the music only. I think that's a wonderful way to go about doing this. And it's very cool. Because out of nowhere, we just kind of have this bombastic, larger rock, distorted guitar stuff towards the end of this track. And it kind of feels out of place, but it also feels right. Well, lyrically, we don't build into that, but musically, we do. And I really like telling this time gap through music alone. All right, we're going to wrap this up. These are my thoughts on Toehider's Meet the Sloth. What did you think of this track? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own perspective or opinion or take on this track? Please put all of that, as well as anything else you'd like to add, into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.